Have you ever wondered how the world map as we know it came to be? Why do people in North and South America speak European languages like Spanish, Portuguese, and English? The story is complex, fascinating, and it all starts with a daring voyage over 500 years ago. Today, we're diving into the incredible story of Christopher Columbus and the journey that didn't just change his life, but changed the entire world. Let's rewind the clock to the 15th century. Imagine a time before airplanes, before GPS, when the world felt both huge and mysterious. For Europeans, Asia, or as they often called it, the Indies, was a land of incredible riches. Spices like pepper and cinnamon, luxurious silks, and precious gems were all highly sought after. But getting them was a real challenge. The land routes were long, dangerous, and controlled by various empires, making goods incredibly expensive. So the race was on to find a sea route to Asia. Most sailors thought the only way was to go south, around Africa, a long and perilous journey. But one man had a different, almost radical idea. His name was Christopher Columbus, a skilled navigator from Genoa, Italy. Columbus was a man of great ambition and conviction. He had studied maps, charts, and ancient texts. He believed the world was a sphere, not a new idea, but not universally accepted either. Based on his calculations, which we now know were quite wrong, he thought the Earth was much smaller than it actually is. This led him to a bold conclusion. He could reach the riches of the East by sailing west, straight across the uncharted waters of the Atlantic Ocean. It sounds simple to us now, but back then it was a terrifying prospect. The Atlantic was known as the Ocean Sea, or the Sea of Darkness. People told stories of sea monsters and boiling waters at the equator. Sailing off into the unknown west was like launching into outer space today. For years, Columbus tried to convince the powerful rulers of Europe to fund his expedition. He went to Portugal, to England, to France, but they all turned him down. They thought his plan was too risky, his calculations were flawed, or they simply had other priorities. Many experts believed the ocean was far too vast to cross. But Columbus was persistent. He never gave up on his dream. Finally, his opportunity came in Spain. Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand had just finished a long war and were looking to expand their influence and find new sources of wealth to compete with their rival, Portugal. After much debate and persuasion, they agreed to sponsor his voyage. It was a gamble, but one they were willing to take. They provided him with 3 ships, the Santa María, a larger cargo ship that would be his flagship, and 2 smaller, faster caravels, the Pinta and the Niña. So, on August 3, 1492, from the port of Palos in Spain, Columbus and his crew of about 90 men set sail. Can you imagine the feeling? A mix of excitement, hope, and sheer terror, heading into an ocean no European had ever crossed. For weeks, they sailed west. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks stretched into more than a month. All they saw was an endless expanse of blue water. The crew grew restless and fearful. They were farther from land than any European sailor had ever been. They started to doubt Columbus, whispering of mutiny, demanding to turn back. Columbus had to use all his skills as a leader to keep their hopes alive. He pointed to signs of land, birds flying overhead, pieces of driftwood in the water, to convince them they were close. He even kept 2 different logbooks, one with the real distance they had traveled, and another with smaller numbers, to show the crew so they wouldn't panic about how far they were from home. Then, in the early morning hours of October 12, 1492, more than 2 months after leaving Spain, a lookout aboard the Pinta shouted the words everyone had been desperate to hear. "Tierra! Tierra! Land! Land!" They had made it. They had crossed the Atlantic. The sailors were overjoyed and relieved. They had reached a small island in what we now call the Bahamas. Columbus went ashore, planted the Spanish flag, and claimed the land for his patrons, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. He encountered the local people, the Taíno, whom he described as gentle and peaceful. But here's the crucial misunderstanding that would shape history. Columbus was convinced he had landed in the Indies, the islands off the coast of Asia. That's why he called the native people Indians, a name that stuck for centuries, even though they were half a world away from India. For the next few months, Columbus and his crew explored the Caribbean, visiting other islands, including Cuba and Hispaniola, which is now home to Haiti and the Dominican Republic. He was constantly searching for the gold and spices he had promised the Spanish crown. He found some small amounts of gold, but nothing like the fabulous wealth he had imagined. He believed he was on the doorstep of China and Japan, just a few islands away from the great cities Marco Polo had described. In January 1493, Columbus set sail back to Spain, leaving some of his men behind to establish a settlement called La Navidad on Hispaniola. The return journey was rough, battered by powerful storms, but he eventually made it back to a hero's welcome. He presented Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand with parrots, plants, and a few of the indigenous people he had brought back with him. He told them stories of the paradise he had found and promised that vast riches were within their grasp. He had succeeded in his mission, or so he thought. He had found a new route to the Indies. Of course, we now know he hadn't reached Asia at all. He had stumbled upon an entire new world, two massive continents, North and South America, that were completely unknown to Europeans, Africans, and Asians. His journey in 1492 was the moment that connected these two separate halves of the world. This event is so significant that historians call it the Columbian Exchange. It was a massive transfer of plants, animals, culture, technology, ideas, and, tragically, diseases between the Americas and the Old World. From the Americas, things like potatoes, tomatoes, corn, chocolate, and tobacco were introduced to Europe, Africa, and Asia. It's hard to imagine Italian food without tomatoes or Irish history without the potato, but before Columbus, they didn't exist in Europe. This new food supply led to a population boom across the Old World. In return, Europeans brought horses, cattle, pigs, and wheat to the Americas. Horses, in particular, transformed the lives of many Native American tribes on the plains. However, this exchange had a dark and devastating side. Columbus's voyages marked the beginning of centuries of European colonization. The arrival of Europeans brought immense suffering to the native peoples of the Americas. They carried diseases like smallpox and measles, to which the indigenous populations had no immunity. These diseases wiped out an estimated 90% of the native population in some areas, one of the greatest demographic disasters in human history. Furthermore, the quest for gold and land led to brutal conquest, forced labor, and the destruction of ancient civilizations like the Aztec and Inca empires. The world that Columbus discovered was not empty. It was home to millions of people with their own rich cultures, societies, and histories. Columbus himself made 3 more voyages to the Americas, always believing he was exploring the outskirts of Asia. He died in 1506, still largely unaware of the true scale and significance of his discovery. It was another explorer, Amerigo Vespucci, who argued that this was indeed a new continent, and it was his name that mapmakers eventually gave to the Americas. So, how should we remember Christopher Columbus? His legacy is incredibly complicated. On one hand, he was a brave and determined explorer whose voyages fundamentally reshaped the world, connecting continents and kicking off an age of global exploration. The year 1492 is undeniably one of the most important dates in history. On the other hand, his arrival began a tragic chapter of colonization, disease, and exploitation for the indigenous peoples of the Americas. He's a figure that represents both incredible human achievement and terrible human cruelty. Understanding Columbus means looking at the whole picture, the courage and the consequences, the discovery and the destruction. His story is a powerful reminder that history is rarely a simple tale of heroes and villains. It's a complex, messy, and deeply human story, and it's a story that continues to shape the world we live in today. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. I hope you found it as fascinating as I do. If you enjoyed this video and want to explore more incredible stories from history, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments what historical event you'd like us to cover next. See you in the next video.